Hello and welcome to the Zeitgeist Podcast, where we explore how words and semantics shape global and local narratives. We are flipping the switch on what finance means from a global and local standpoint. We explore how powerful narratives help to shape our world and how we view all of the various industrial landscapes, finance, as well as economics, a little bit of politics, and many other aspects. So it's good to be back. We have quite a roster of topics to discuss, but I think we will start with a little bit of a basic, what might people might call a basic concept in finance, which is money. And this episode might be quite interesting. I think Rauf can explain a little bit more. Rauf, take it away.
Thank you, Khalid. So we're back on the Zeitgeist Podcast. And this season, I think we're on season 3. We've been doing this for some time. It's called The Money Paradox. And as Khalid said, we deal with narratives, sort of how semantics and rhetoric, words, and how they interact with global narratives and what's happening on the ground. So this season is called the Money Paradox. Now, there's a paradox when it comes to money. Like you said, as a foundation, the backbone, we tackle finance as an inroad, basically, into many aspects of our lives that are affected by the flow of capital, by money, right? But there is a paradox, and as I think you're going to be able to see, or you might be able to see. So this first episode is called Money Rewired. And by way of a quick introduction, in today's volatile global economy, savings accounts aren't necessarily going to cut it anymore. Financial resilience now requires innovation, adaptability, and a fresh look at how we invest for the future. For our financial futures, and from sustainable investing to next generation financial literacy. This episode breaks down how to rethink your relationship with money and prepare for whatever comes next. Whether you're an individual or you're working for an institution, how we deal with finances is changing on a personal level for individuals as well as institutions or institutional investors or retail investors. There's so much happening in the global economy and the local economy. Now in Malaysia, we are actually going through something very big, a very big shift that is riding on certain global factors, and I think we're going to get into that. Now, us at Palindrome, we basically deal with narratives, as I mentioned, and we have a proprietary framework called the Narrate framework, which basically, in a nutshell, discerns what the current narrative is, or the current zeitgeist is, and then offers an alternative narrative or a challenger narrative. So the current narrative regarding personal finance is financial security is about being cautious with your savings and avoiding risks. The alternative narrative or the challenger narrative that might be appearing is in a chaotic world. True financial resilience is built through adaptability, innovation, and proactive strategies like sustainable investing. So this is a potential challenger narrative that is emerging. We're going to discuss this. But anyway, back to what I was mentioning. Oh, and by the way, for those who have not subscribed to our podcast, stop being naughty and please do. So, so yeah, as I was mentioning, our local economy over here in Malaysia is going through a big shift that is being driven by, or sort of riding on, a larger global narrative shift, which is a reindustrialization. And we've talked about this before, right? A reindustrialization of global economies. So society has moved from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy, right? Industrial economy, and then the tertiary sector, right? Services, and all that, right? Now, over here in Southeast Asia, with smaller countries like Malaysia, Singapore, these are like Singapore, for example, is built on the tertiary sector. Am I correct? Services, financial services, and business services. So why do you think there is this global shift back to reindustrialization. And it's important to take note because this is opening up new investment opportunities for individuals and retail investors in this narrative shift from the services sector or the tertiary sector back to industrialization. So maybe you can walk us through that, Khalid.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting trend that's happening right now, and there are many possible factors that you can consider, that you can take into consideration. I mean, the entire narrative right now is predicated on this idea of a reindustrialization or a manufacturing strategy or an industry strategy approach and that a lot of nations are taking into consideration at this point in time. There's a lot of implementation. I mean, we here in Malaysia right now have a lot of focus and interest in the remanufacturing of different industries. I mean, we focus on Penang with the rise of semiconductor manufacturing as well. A lot of foreign direct investment coming in to Malaysia. The current administration is working towards that, but it's not something that comes out of nowhere. Apparently, even as far back as 2019, pre-COVID times, Biden's administration in the United States, had developed and conceptualized and implemented various policies, including the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act, which basically were policies that were implemented to make sure that America reinforced its position or to try and reclaim a lot of the manufacturing and supply chain mechanics that had for so long been part of a little bit more of a global infrastructure or a global ecosystem. This is also in tandem, if we get into a little bit of the politics of it, this is also in tandem with what China is facing with Taiwan. Taiwan being one of the big chip manufacturing strongholds over the past few decades. But now with the political tensions between China, Taiwan, there seems to be some kind of an overarching opportunity where there are other nations that are trying to vie for dominance in chips manufacturing. And that's something that's interesting that's happening as well. And to tie it all in with money, of course, this all has to do with economic perseverance, economic dominance. So, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I actually forgot to introduce the keywords for this episode. The current narrative keyword, because this podcast is built around words and how words affect global narratives. So the current narrative keywords are risk avoidance. We're talking about personal finance. Yeah, so, like investing for individuals and institutions like retail investors. So current narrative keywords are risk avoidance, cautious planning, basic financial education, traditional investments, budgeting, conservative planning, and retirement savings. This is basically how people have been accustomed to approaching investments. Yeah. The alternative narrative keywords or the challenger narrative keywords are adaptability, sustainable investing, innovation, financial independence, proactive strategies, future-proof finances, diversified wealth building, impact investing, and economic resilience. So it's a new framework for understanding investing in local and global markets. And you mentioned a few interesting points. Basically, in a nutshell, like you were talking about China, Taiwan, Penang, Malaysia, right, and the U.S. This is all related to sort of, maybe you can say, political alignment, and we seem to be going through this like big 80s revival thing, because I think around the 80s I was born around the 80s, right? And we had this I think the non-aligned movement came around during that time, the Cold War, right? And this sort of tension between communism and Western democracy or Western capitalism, right? Two frameworks that are still today affecting our world. Back then, NAM, meaning the Vietnam War, right, was centered around basically stopping the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. We're back here again in Southeast Asia, right? And you can say that it's communism, but maybe not really, because we have China, which is by now I think not even really communist, very communist, or purely communist anymore, right? But it's still concerning the same players, right? It's still involving the same players. The West on one side, basically trying to use Southeast Asia as like a bulwark against Chinese influence, China's influence, right? And along with that, we have the resource of this era, which is semiconductors, right? The semiconductor space is basically the new front line, and that's why it's so related to a reindustrialization because even though AI and AI is very connected to it, even though AI is like about software and technology and so it's rooted in new chips that are stronger and faster, and so it's kind of like no wonder that Nvidia is one of the most valuable companies today, and that happened pretty fast,
Yeah,
right?
and it also has to do with the current emphasis on technology. We're moving towards this climax in popularity with artificial intelligence, AI. The interesting rise of chip manufacturing, specifically semiconductor chips manufacturing, has to do it's closely correlated with the history of Moore's law and how that famous scientist actually developed the kind of the structure or the fundamental or the foundation specifically for the technology that we use today. A lot of the electronic technology that's implemented in today's world. From what I understand, what's so significant about semiconductor chips is that it exists or to some degree is involved with most of the technological infrastructure that exists everywhere here at any given point. So it has become very much a sought after, commodity driven, high demand industry. So the development of this industry is something that ties back completely and directly to monies on a national level and on a global level. So that's also something that's happening that's interesting. Technology being the main theme, or as we like to call it, the overarching narrative. The narrative of the day is technology. There's a lot of hype and attention towards this, and of course, what follows after is the economic ramifications of that. Yeah.
Do you still remember what Ian Bremmer was talking about? Because basically, like,
yes, eventually all technology the biggest technology companies in the world are slowly making their way towards becoming some of the most prominent significant political players in the world. They will soon almost overtake or match the power and influence of nation states. So,
exactly. If you as I was about to say, I think my entire life I've only ever known a unipolar world, and what that means is a world with one superpower, the United States, right? Actually, I might have been too young to remember that, but I think I did live through. I think it's called the bipolar world, with two powers, right? Soviet Union and the U.S. So this was during the Cold War times, right? And yeah, so what Ian Bremmer was talking about was it's a unique time in global history because we might be living through a time when there might be three powers. I don't know if you call this a multipolar world, like three powers, one of them being the technological elite, right? And if you look at Elon Musk's Starlink's involvement in the Ukraine war, right, basically providing internet to Ukraine, right, in order for them to have combat capabilities to fight against, because so much of war is now rooted in technology and AI. If you look at like the kind of recent drone strikes, and if you look at companies like Palantir involved heavily with U.S. defense.
Yeah, I mean Sean McFate, the expert in foreign policy, he was the one that was talking about billionaire warlords and how basically the world that we live in today was shaped throughout history and by the privatization of armies and military force that was extremely predicated on the idea of private wealth fueling all of the capacity or capability for war power. For example, another interesting thing that happened in history, for example, the bankers controlling armies, empires, kings, for example, Jakub Fugar, who was a very powerful banker throughout Europe between the 1400s, 1500s, if I'm not mistaken, around that time. And he was, basically the one to manage a lot of the money and leveraging on debt, leveraging on the consolidation of assets in order to strong arm or to convince and influence or strike deals with key members of the time, so that he may be able to control and influence a lot of the political happenings of that point in time. So it's interesting what, if we take a step back, this episode's about money. I think we're going off tangent a bit, but if we take a step back to the idea or concept of what money is, very interesting, the concept of money. It's a consolidation of power, but not just that. The great Korean philosopher, Korean-German philosopher Byung-Chul Han talks about money as a consolidation of social power. It is a way for us essentially to get people to do what we want them to do collectively without having to know them personally on a personal basis, know their father and their mother and such. It is a more efficient means of us consolidating what Michel Foucault, another philosopher, calls biopower in relation to his philosophy on biopolitics. So, people think money is just this single dimensional thing, but I think conceptually there's a lot to be said about money from a historical standpoint, sociological standpoint, Yeah.
Money is also, bringing it back to money, as you said, right? Money is a lot of things. One of it is a medium of exchange, storage of value. These are the basic things that we're taught in like school, commerce, class, right? But money also stands for truth. I mean, it is a methodology for the information flow of truth, right? What people are willing to pay for something, how valuable it is. That's why, as I mentioned, NVIDIA, semiconductor, microchip, whatever company is now the most valuable or one of the most valuable companies in the world. It shows what people's priorities are. And the flow of money as investors, because we are investors as well, right? And for people who invest, right? Bring it back to that, whether individuals or institutional investors, right? The relation of money, power, resources, global alignment, right? These are all things that we have to, I think, look into when we make our investment moves. And on that topic of money and in relation to what's happening, also some very, very big things are happening. I really do recommend that people open their eyes and watch the news and what's happening economically. Malaysia now has applied to join BRICS. I think we are getting really into joining BRICS. For those who don't know what BRICS is, you can look it up. This is a big challenge. Our Prime Minister talked about how it can release our dollar dependence, right? There has been, for a very long time, what we call the petrodollar complex, right? Petrodollar complex, the combination of oil, the US dollar, and defense, right? That understanding through that lens, you can see about the political alignment and how, like with Saudi Arabia and blah, blah, blah. Now I think Saudi Arabia is officially with BRICS, right? So the new resource now is no longer really oil. I think people have started to see that, and I think we might get into that in our episode 3, which is related to sustainability and all that. I think we're running out of time for our first episode, but so just to touch briefly on that, right? I think moving forward, the new resource is not oil anymore. The new energy or biopower, as you mentioned, right? Leveraging off of different people in an economy, money as a tool for that, basically, right? But not only that, now we're talking about a new kind of resource that is developing and that we barely even understand ourselves, basically, which is this new intelligence that has come into the world, this artificial intelligence, right? And we don't know how much more powerful this artificial intelligence might get and how much it might decimate different job sectors. people have been apparently talking about implementing some kind of a minimum wage system, right? As people start to lose their jobs, as sectors start to become more automated, right? And so the semiconductor chip sector is closely related to that and how we invest our money in these different big market movements. Key takeaway points for this episode being that I think people should really watch closely what's happening in the world, and to start. I mean, having risk of avoidance and being conservative is all still part of a sound investment strategy, right? But I think you were mentioning about this Nassim Taleb and the sort of like inevitability of black swans, right? We are living through this era of huge movements and huge black swans.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so much can be said about the concepts of Nassim Taleb that delve into things like the black swan. But I think in relation to that as well, a lot of interesting things have been said by others. For example, Joy Ito, who's the author of a book called Whiplash, which he co-authored with Jeff Howe. And in the first few chapters, he talks about some interesting misconceptions and heuristics that go with the idea of technology and disruption. For instance, back then, the master and apprenticeship dynamic between masters and apprentices was something that was seen as a great innovation that helped to develop societies moving forward during the 1800s. But what people didn't see was the industrial age coming up soon after that. So throughout the 1800s, what happened was industrialization took over. People didn't see that coming. What they thought was the innovation was master and apprentice partnerships, congregating and collectively congregating into societies in order to build up cities. That's what they thought it was. So similarly, here in the modern world, we may have our eye on specific key things that we're seeing in the media and such, like AI, for example, which may very well be extremely significant in its development and in its impact from here on. But also there may be an inflation of expectations, for example. So it's about sometimes managing expectations to that certain degree, and to tie everything back to money, because that's what this episode was about. I think money plays a big part in the hyperinflation of expectations. Sometimes a lot of marketing gets put into, is present in the way that we perceive things. And so I think it's also important to tame our expectations and our excitement at times. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot that can be said about that. I mean, people riding on the waves set by big whales and all that, right? Following the money and all. A conversation for the next episode, possibly. So, thank you very much for watching, and let's wrap up this first episode of the Zeitgeist Podcast. I'm Rauf Fadila from Palindrome, and I am joined by my co-host Khalid from Palindrome. Thank you very much.